my name is Brandi Joan. You can find me at Brandi Joan across all platforms, and today we are sewing up my McCall's number M8550 design. As always, the back of the pattern envelope is going to give you all of the information you need, like the sizing and the list of supplies. So give that a look before you start, and we're going to jump right into it. So first we're going to start working on the bodice of the dress, and we want to sew the bodice sides to the bodice front, and we want to make sure we're matching up all of those notches. There should be 2 on each seam for these, and we're going to sew them up with a 5/8 seam allowance. And just make sure that you're sewing the right sides together. The 2 side fronts do look identical, so if your fabric doesn't have a clear right or wrong side, it can be a bit confusing and you can end up sewing the wrong sides together. Once you have those 2 seams sewn up, go ahead and give them a good press. Then apply your fusible interfacing to the neckline. Set the bodice front aside for later, and we're going to move on to the back bodice, and we're going to do the same thing we did to the front, apply the fusible interfacing to the neckline, and then we're going to sew up the dart along the waistline. I did make a mistake when sewing this up the first time, so I brought in a different clip of me pinning the dart. So that way you still get a visual of the steps. It is a different fabric, but you understand that this is the same step, just a different piece of fabric. So once you have your darts all pinned up, bring them over to your sewing machine, and you're going to want to start where the legs end the wide part of the dart, sew all the way up to the tip, almost go off the edge, leave long strings, and then tie them off. Once you've sewn up both darts, go ahead and give them a good press towards the body. Then bring your bodice front back over, and we're going to pin the shoulders and the side seams together, and then sew them in place with a 5/8 seam allowance. Again, make sure these are right sides touching. For now, we're done with the bodice, and we're going to move on to the skirt. So grab your skirt front and your skirt side pieces, and we're going to sew them together along the inner seams, matching all of the notches using a 5/8 seam allowance, sewing them right sides together. Once you've connected the skirt front to the skirt side fronts, go ahead and press the seams. The directions say to press the seams towards the body again. I did press mine flat and open. And now we're going to connect the skirt back to the skirt side back. And we're going to do that with both sets of skirt side back and skirt back. As always, make sure you're matching up all of those notches using a 5/8 seam allowance and sewing them right sides together. And now, to attach all of the skirt pieces together, we're going to sew these side seams using a 5/8 seam allowance, matching all of the notches, and of course, sewing them right sides together. Now it's time to attach the bodice to the skirt, and we want to make sure, of course, again, that we are lining up all of the seams, all of the notches, and we're going to sew that with a 5/8 seam allowance right sides together, and then we want to press the seam up towards the bodice. Now, repeat steps 1 through 7 with all of your lining pieces. So now the time has come to connect the lining to the shell fabric. So with right sides together, pin the two along the neckline, matching the centers, all of the seams, all of the notches, ending 3 inches on both sides from the back. So you want to end 3 inches from the back on both sides. Trim the seam allowance, paying close attention to the corners, but do not trim what you did not sew, the 3 inches at the back. Do not trim that. Now we're going to press the seam allowance towards the lining of the dress, getting ready to understitch, and we're going to then understitch it all the way along that seam line, leaving those 3 inches at the back open. Now, everybody's favorite part, we're going to attach the zipper. So on the outside of the dress, you want to pin the right side of the zipper face down on the right side of the dress. I always triple check this because no matter how many times I sew zippers, I will still get it wrong sometimes. Remember, before sewing your zipper down, you want to switch to your invisible zipper foot. It's going to make your life so much easier. Now, once you've sewn that up, go ahead and bring it over to your ironing board. Check that the zipper still opens because sometimes you can catch something without realizing. Once it does open and close, go ahead and pin the left side of the zipper down on the left side of the dress on the outside. Make sure you're not getting any of the lining. We just want to sew it to the outside of the dress. And again, we want to check that the zipper still zips up and goes back down and that it's invisible from the outside of the dress. Then sew that remaining gap at the end of the dress using your regular presser foot. Now we're going to sew the lining to the zipper as well. Turn the lining inside out. So the zipper should be sandwiched now in between the two layers of fabric, in between the lining and the shell. Then sew up that remaining gap below the zipper the same way you did with the lining. Bring your sleeve over and we're going to gather the top cap of the sleeve between the two small dots. I like to gather by raising my stitch length all the way up to the top and my tension all the way up as high as it can go, and then sewing big long stitches and gathering once it's sewn. It will kind of gather as you sew, but then you can adjust it once you're done. Now we're going to make a narrow hem at the lower edge of the sleeve. I like to press mine as I go, especially with fabric like this because it tends to show every single stitch with a wrinkle if it's not perfect. Go ahead and give that hem a good press, and I am doing this slightly different than the instructions. I'm sorry, I just find this so much easier for me. I am going to sew the bias tape down as a channel onto the sleeve before I sew up that inner arm. That way I'm able to insert the elastic, sew down the elastic at either end, and then I'm going to sew up that arm seam. So as you can see here, now that I have my elastic inserted into that channel, I'm just going to sew up that arm seam. Now we're going to attach the sleeves to their corresponding armholes. Before you do this, make sure that you've basted the armhole so the layers of fabric are together. Because we're working with 3 layers, it's just going to be easier having those 2 combined. Now all that's left to do is attach the lace by hand sewing and complete a narrow hem on the edge of the dress the same way that we did with the sleeve. And that's it, you're done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you love your new dress, and if you like this video, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to Simplicity, and check me out at Brandi Joan across all platforms. I'll see you next time.